What if Marshal Grouchy had marched to the sound of the guns at Waterloo? That single choice could have rewritten Europe's fate.
Imagine Grouchy hearing the thunder of artillery from Waterloo. He pauses, turns his horse, and orders his men to reverse course. The French columns march through muddy roads, arriving at the battlefield by late afternoon. Napoleon sees them approaching from the east and knows his gamble has paid off. The Prussians, still hours away, are blocked by Grouchy's rear guard. Wellington's army, exhausted and low on ammunition, faces a fresh French corps. The British squares begin to crumble under combined attacks. By nightfall, the Duke of Wellington is captured, and Blucher's Prussians are scattered. Europe's greatest coalition lies in ruins. News of Waterloo spreads like wildfire. In London, the government falls into panic. King George III is declared unfit to rule, and a regency crisis erupts. In Vienna, the Congress of Vienna disintegrates as delegates flee. Tsar Alexander I of Russia considers a separate PAC. Napoleon, now master of the battlefield, dictates Thames, Belgium annexed, der Hineland secured, and a puppet kingdom in the Netherlands. Prussia is stripped of its eastern territories, given to Russia as a bribe for neutrality. Austria loses influence in Italy. The old order collapses overnight. Europe's map is redrawn not by diplomats, but by the sword. Napoleon returns to Paris in triumph. His enemies are humiliated. He consolidates power by offering amnesty to former royalists, but his secret police monitor every whisper. The Bourbon monarchy is exiled permanently. Napoleon's new constitution grants him absolute control, yet maintains a facade of liberal reforms. He knows that lasting PAC requires economic strength. He invests in infrastructure, channels, and early industrialization. French engineers pioneer new manufacturing techniques. The continental system is revived, but this time with Britain blockaded by a united European coastline. British goods rot in warehouses, while French industry booms. But not everyone is happy. Nationalist movements in Germany and Italy see Napoleon's victory as a setback. Secret societies plot uprisings. In response, Napoleon creates a European confederation under French leadership, with local princes as vassals. He grants autonomy to some regions, but crushes dissent ruthlessly. The German states are forced into the Confederation of der Rhine, with French officials overseeing their governments. Italian patriots are executed or exiled. Napoleon's vision of a unified Europe is one of domination, not liberation. Gazettes of future rebellion are sown, but for now, his grip is iron. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches with concern. President James Madison fears a resurgent France might challenge American expansion. But Napoleon, focused on Europe, offers neutrality in exchange for trade. The War of 1812 ends with a status quo, and America turns inward. Without a European counterweight, the Monroe Doctrine is never declared. Instead, GAS focuses on westward expansion, avoiding entanglements. Meanwhile, Britain retreats to its empire, strengthening ties with Canada and India. The world becomes bipolar, a French-dominated continent and a British maritime empire. The stage is set for a very different 19th century. The cannon smoke clears over the muddy fields of Waterloo. But this time, the French eagles do not retreat. Napoleon's old guard advances, and Wellington's lines crumble. The Duke is captured, his retreat surrounded. Blucher, arriving too late, is also taken. The news spreads like wildfire across Europe. Kings and emperors freeze in their palaces. The Menteithouke had defeated is back, and he is not stopping at Waterloo. His army marches north, toward Brussels, with terrifying speed. Panic grips every capital from London to Vienna. Brussels falls within days. The French tricolor flies over the Grand Place. Citizens watch in stunned silence as Napoleon rides through the streets. He does not pause for celebrations. His eyes are set on Paris. The French capital is in chaos. Louis XVIII has already fled. The Bourbon monarchy, restored just a year earlier, evaporates like morning mist. Napoleon's march becomes a triumphant procession. Veterans weep at the sight of their emperor. By the time he reaches the Tuileries Palace, the throne is his again. Europe's nightmare has returned. The Congress of Vienna shatters. Metternich, Chasteleriac, and Tsar Alexander realized their grand settlement is worthless. They had redrawn the map of Europe to contain France. Now that map is burning. Prussia is humiliated, its army crushed. Austria fears for its Italian provinces. Russia watches warily from the east. But no one moves to attack. Not yet. The coalition that defeated Napoleon in 1814 is fractured. Britain hesitates. Its treasury drained. The allies are paralyzed by fear and mistrust. Napoleon exploits this hesitation brilliantly. Within weeks, Napoleon rebuilds his Grande Armée. Veterans flock to his banners. Conscription is reinstated. French factories work day and night producing muskets and cannon. The emperor knows he must strike before the allies regroup. His first target is Derhine. French forces cross the river and reclaim the left bank. German princes, Once his vassals, are forced to choose secede. Some resist. They are crushed. The Confederation of Derhine is reborn. Austria mobilizes but hesitates to engage. Napoleon's momentum seems unstoppable. Europe holds its breath.
Britain is now isolated. The Royal Navy controls the seas, but Napoleon controls the continent. The British government faces a crisis. Prime Minister Liverpool's cabinet is divided. Some advocate for peace, others demand a new coalition, but where will they find allies? Prussia is broken, Austria is wavering, Russia is distant. The British people are weary of war. Trade with Europe has collapsed. Prices are soaring. Riots erupt in Manchester and Birmingham. Napoleon offers an olive branch. He proposes a truce based on the status quo. Britain must decide. Fight alone or accept French dominance. We upload videos like this every day. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Television.
Across the Atlantic, the United States watches with alarm. President Madison had hoped for a stable Europe. Now a resurgent France threatens American trade. The War of 1812 is barely over. American forces are weak. Napoleon's victory at Waterloo emboldens his Spanish ally. Spain demands the return of Florida. U.S. cannot resist. Meanwhile, Napoleon's agents stir trouble in Canada. Britain is too distracted to reinforce its colony. The balance of power has shifted. The New World must now reckon with a Napoleonic Europe. History has taken a dark, uncertain turn. The news of Waterloo spreads like wildfire across the continent. Within days, every capital from Vienna to St. Petersburg knows that Napoleon has not only won but has captured Wellington and Blucher. The carefully crafted balance of power shatters instantly. The Congress of Vienna, which had redrawn Europe's borders just months earlier, collapses into chaos. Diplomats fled the city, fearing a French invasion. Metternich, the Austrian architect of the post-war order, watches his life as work tremble. The old regimes tremble. For them, this is not just a military defeat. It is the end of an era. The return of the revolutionary spectre they thought they had buried. Napoleon does not rest. He marches his victorious army straight for Brussels, then Paris. The French people greet him as a savior. King Louis XVIII flees into exile on Timor. Within a month, Napoleon is back in the Tuileries Palace, more powerful than ever. But this time, he is not content with France alone. He issues a decree dissolving the Congress of Vienna and declaring all its territorial changes null and void. The German princes who had allied with the coalition are punished. Their lands are annexed or turned into client state. The map of Europe is being redrawn by the sword once again. The nationalist movements in Germany and Italy, which had begun to stir under French occupation, are brutally crushed. Napoleon seized them as threats to his imperial order. He consolidates the Confederation of the Rhine into a single, unified German satellite state under French control. In Italy, he abolishes the Kingdom of Naples and installs his own viceroy. The dream of a united Italy is postponed for generations. Instead of liberal nationalists, Europe gets a new wave of French centralization. The ideas of the French Revolution are now synonymous with Napoleonic dictatorship. Liberty, equality, fraternity become empty slogans under the shadow of the eagle. But Napoleon is no fool. He knows that lasting power requires more than military might. He turns his attention to the economy. The continental system, his blockade against Britain, is now enforced with brutal efficiency. French industry booms as it supplies the entire continent. The Industrial Revolution, which had been lagging in France compared to Britain, accelerates dramatically. Railways, canals, and factories spring up across the empire. Napoleon invests heavily in infrastructure, linking his domains with roads and telegraph lines. By 1830, France has become the workshop of Europe. British goods are banned, and British influence wanes. The balance of power shifts eastward. Napoleon, ever the pragmatist, seeks an alliance with Russia. Tsar Alexander I, initially hostile, is persuaded by French diplomatic overtures and the promise of a partition of the Ottoman Empire. In 1835, the Treaty of Tilsit is revived and expanded. France and Russia agree to a sphere of influence. France dominates Western and Central Europe, Russia takes the Balkans and the Straits. The two empires become the arbiters of the continent. Britain, isolated and blockaded, is forced to make peace. The British Empire focuses on its overseas colonies, abandoning Europe to Napoleon. By 1850, the new European order is cemented. The Holy Roman Empire is dead, replaced by a French-dominated confederation. The Habsburgs are reduced to a secondary power. Prussia is dismantled. Italy is a French protectorate. The dream of nationalists is replaced by the reality of empire. But this stability comes at a cost. The liberal ideals of the Enlightenment are suppressed. Secret police monitor dissent. The Napoleonic Code, once a symbol of progress, is used to enforce authoritarian rule. Yet, trade flourishes, science advances, and Paris becomes the undisputed cultural capital of the world. The butterfly has flapped its wings, and the storm is here. By the dawn of the 20th century, the map of Europe has been redrawn. From the summitted plains of Spain to the frozen forests of Poland, One flag flies supreme, the imperial eagle of France. Napoleon's dynasty, now 3 generations old, rules an empire that stretches from the Atlantic to the edge of the Russian steppe. The continent is a patchwork of client kingdoms, puppet state, and annexed territories. Paris has become the undisputed capital of the world. Every ambassador, every merchant, every artist must pay homage to the Tuileries Palace. But this glittering facade hides deep fractures. The empire is vast, but it is brittle. And beyond its borders, all enemies sharpen their knives. Across the English Channel, Britain has not been idle. Defeated at Waterloo, humiliated on the continent, the British Empire turned its gaze outward. India, Africa, and the Far East became the new theaters of war. By 1900, the Union Jack flies over a quarter of the globe. But this is a lonely empire. Cut off from European markets, Britain relies on its colonies for raw materials and food. The Royal Navy rules to waves, but the French fleet grows stronger every year. A cold patch exists between the two powers. Neither dare strike the other directly. Instead, they fight through process, through trade embargoes, through espionage. The world is divided into two spheres, the French sphere and the British sphere. To the east, a sleeping giant awakens. Russia, humiliated by Napoleon in 1812, has spent a century modernizing in secret. The Tsars have built railways, factories, and a massive army. By 1900, the Russian Empire stretches from Warsaw to Vladivostok. But Russia's ambitions clash with France's. The two giants share a border that stretches from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Tensions simmer over control of the Balkans, the Ottoman Empire, and the warm water ports. A new kind of war is brewing. Not the grand battles of Napoleon's time, but a cold war of ideology, espionage, and proxy conflicts. The world holds its breath, waiting for the first spark. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches from a distance. Without the threat of European intervention, America has focused inward. The Monroe Doctrine is now a reality. The Americas are an American sphere. The United States has expanded to the Pacific, but it has not become a global power. No World War means no American intervention in Europe. No Lend-Lease, no Marshall Plan. The United States is rich, isolated, and content. But this isolation comes at a cost. American culture, technology, and ideas do not spread as they did in our timeline. The world is shaped by French philosophy, French engineering, French fashion. The American dream is a distant whisper, drowned out by the roar of the imperial eagle. The technological landscape is also transformed. Without the devastation of world wars, innovation takes a different path. France leads in steam power, metallurgy, and early aviation. The Eiffel Tower is not just a monument, it is a radio tower, a symbol of French dominance over the airwaves. But the path of change is slower. No world war means no crash programs for radar, jet engines, or nuclear weapons. The internal combustion engine is a luxury, not a necessity. Society is more stratified, more rigid. The aristocracy survives, the bourgeoisie thrives, and the working class struggles. The Industrial Revolution continues, but it is a French Revolution, orderly and controlled from above. By the end of the century, the world is frozen in a delicate balance. The Napoleonic Empire, the British Empire, and Russian Empire form a triangle of power. No single nation can dominate. Wars are fought by process in Africa, Asia, and the Balkans. The great powers compete for influence, resources, and prestige. But the shadow of total war looms. The weapons are deadlier than ever, machine guns, dreadnought, poison gas. One miscalculation could trigger a conflict that would dwarf Waterloo. The world in 1900 is not achievable. It is a powder keg waiting for a match. And the question remains, how long can this new world order last? Fast forward to the present day. In this alternate timeline, the map of Europe looks nothing like the one we know. The Napoleonic Empire, once a fleeting dream, has become a permanent reality. From the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the vast plains of Poland, French tricolors fly over capital cities. The European Union, in our world a patchwork of sovereign states, is here a centralized empire ruled from Paris. Border state once sparked wars have dissolved. The continent breathes under a single administrative system, its laws, currency, and even language standardized by imperial decree. But this unity came at a price. Local cultures, once vibrant, have been absorbed into a grand Napoleonic identity. The question lingers, was this patch worth the loss of diversity? Technology in this world has taken a different path. Without the devastating World War that shattered our timeline, scientific progress was more gradual, less driven by military necessity. The Internet, born from Cold War paranoia, never emerged. Instead, a sophisticated network of pneumatic tubes and optical telegraphs connects the empire. Trains powered by advanced steam engines crisscross the continent, but personal automobiles are rare. The space race never happened. Satellites do not orbit the Earth. Communication relies on physical infrastructure, not wireless signals. Yet, in some ways, life is more deliberate. People read more, read letters, and engage in face-to-face conversation. The pace of change is slower, but perhaps more humane. The absence of nuclear weapons means the threat of annihilation is absent. But so is the wonder of moon landings. Culturally, the world is dominated by French thought. Paris is the undisputed capital of art, literature, and philosophy. The Impressionists never gave way to abstract expressionism. Romanticism still holds sway. Every educated person speaks French, and the works of Victor Hugo are considered the pinnacle of literature. But this cultural hegemony has a dark side. Regional languages like Catalan, Breton, and Occitan have been suppressed. The vibrant diversity of European folklore is fading. In our world, the British invasion broke rock and roll, hare, tools, and the opera remain supreme. The absence of American influence means jazz, blues, and later hip-hop never spread globally. Music is orchestral, structured, and formal. Rebellion is channeled into poetry, not electric guitars. The soul of a continent is elegant, but perhaps a little stifled. Politically, the world is bipolar. On one side, the Napoleonic Empire, a vast continental bloc. On the other, the Russian Empire, which never fell to communists. The two superpowers engage in a quiet Cold War, not of nuclear missiles, but of espionage and influence. Britain, reduced to its island, focuses on its overseas colonies, but its power is diminished. The United States, isolated and inward-looking, never became a global polycheman. The scramble for Africa was more restrained, with the continent divided between French and Russian spheres. The Middle East, without the Sykes-Picot Agreement, is a patchwork of Ottoman successor state. The world is more stable, but also more stagnant. There is no United Nations, no global consensus on human rights. The individual is subordinated to the state. Freedom, as we know it, is a foreign concept. What about the rest of the world? Asia, without European colonialism as we know it, developed differently. China, never humiliated by the Opium Wars, remains a proud empire. Japan, never forced open by Commodore Perry, stays in isolation longer. The Industrial Revolution reaches them later, but on their own terms. India, never unified under British rule, is a collection of princely states, some allied with France, others with Russia. The Americas, free from European interference, see the United States expand across the continent, but without the global reach. The Monroe Doctrine is enforced, but the US is a regional power, not a superpower. The Pacific is a French lake, with Tahiti and New Caledonia as major hubs. The world is multipolar, but with fewer points of friction. Yet, the lack of global communication means that ideas spread slowly. Innovation is stifled by the absence of competition.
So what is the lesson of this alternate history? It is that the smallest moments can ripple through centuries. A single decision at Waterloo, a marshal's choice to march left instead of right, reshaped the entire modern world. Our own reality, with its wars, its technology, its culture, is just one of countless possibilities. The butterfly effect is not just a theory. It is the fabric of history. We live in a world that could have been so different. The next time you see a French flag, or hear a waltz, or read a novel, remember, these are not inevitable. They are the products of chance, of human decisions, of luck, and perhaps that knowledge should make us humble. Our present is fragile, our future is unwritten. The only certainty is that history, like a river, could have flowed down 1,000 other paths. Hi, everyone. Quick reminder, subscribe for high-quality daily content. Sparkles, don't miss out. Subscribe today for exclusive content tomorrow. Wrap gift.